On April 1, 2026, a rocket was launched from the spaceport at Cape Canaveral, Florida. It sent a spacecraft into space, carrying 4 astronauts who set off toward the moon. After 10 days, the spacecraft, after orbiting the moon, successfully landed in the Atlantic Ocean. The purpose of this mission was to test the equipment that the American Aerospace Agency NASA plans to use for landing people on the moon. For Americans, this will not be their first visit to the satellite. In 1969, the Apollo spacecraft landed the first people on the surface of the moon. This brought the United States victory in the race with the Soviet Union and demonstrated American economic and technological superiority over its rival. After this victory, the United States rather quickly lost interest in flights to the moon and focused on exploring near-Earth space. A new rivalry forced them to recall their former achievements, this time with China, which has announced plans not only to fly to the moon in the coming years, but also to establish a permanent station there. To confirm its status as a world leader, the United States government tasked NASA with landing people on the moon before China. Such an expedition is scheduled to take place in 2028. The reason that compels the 2 largest economies in the world to hurry with a visit to the moon is entirely practical. Over the next few decades, it could become an important zone of economic activity. The development of its available resources will bring huge profits, so the new lunar race has clear signs of a gold rush. The desire to reach the moon's vast riches has prompted other countries developing their space industries to step up their efforts as well. They are looking for opportunities to join the projects of advanced nations or are trying to develop their own lunar programs. The current race promises to become even more intense. So let's see to what extent the competition between the US and China for control over resources can turn not only into a technological race, but also into a factor of global militarization of space and a new division of spheres of influence. And will it lead to that? To a new extraterrestrial economic war. In space, a mistake in a single number can cost not just the failure of a mission, but also years of work. NASA has already spent over $93 billion on the Artemis program to return humans to the moon, which we will discuss in detail later. That's why, before NASA sends people to the moon, data analysts and scientific teams run through arrays of data, telemetry, simulations, system metrics, and even health risks for the astronauts. While some see a rocket in the mission, others see data, and it's on this data that they build a career with IT-level pay. If you're feeling burned out and have hit a financial ceiling, it's time to change fields. A data analyst at GoIT is the brains of the business. You analyze data and tell the company what brought success and what wasted the budget. It's stability, the freedom to work remotely, and getting paid for your skills, not just the hours you put in. Don't just take my word for it. Try it yourself. Sign up for the free intensive course from GoIT. You'll write your first SQL code and understand how data drives the world. No risks. The QR code is on the screen. The link is in the description. Check it out. After the end of World War II, humanity hoped that peace would last for a long time and that conflicts would be resolved exclusively through negotiations. However, it soon became clear that these hopes were in vain. The Cold War began, the main manifestation of which was the creation of increasingly deadly types of weapons. During the first years, the United States had an advantage due to the possession of atomic weapons. However, in 1949, the Soviet Union created its own bomb. Since then, the main focus of the arms race shifted to the development of delivery systems. The advantage in a possible confrontation could be gained by the side that could launch an atomic bomb over a greater distance. So the United States of America and the Soviet Union set about advancing their own missile programs. Soon, the first intercontinental ballistic missiles were created. The question arose: how could they demonstrate their capabilities to the enemy and the whole world without provoking a nuclear conflict? And then the idea of space launches emerged. The Soviet Union became the leader in the early stages of the space race. In October 1957, it was the first to launch an artificial Earth satellite, Sputnik 1, into space. Soviet propaganda wrapped this event in bold statements about scientific progress, space exploration, and the advantages of the communist way of life. Americans realized that they were no longer protected by two oceans. The USSR had acquired technologies capable of delivering nuclear weapons to any point in the world. For their part, the Soviet Union made the most of the launch to demoralize American society. For 5 days after the launch, Moscow did not publish any photos of the satellite and did not reveal what exactly it was carrying. Against this backdrop, rumors quickly spread that a Soviet atomic bomb was already orbiting above the Earth. So the launch of the satellite fueled both the space race and the arms race. This caused a wave of panic in the United States, known as the satellite crisis, and forced them to accelerate their own space program. 4 months after the satellite, the Americans managed to launch their own satellite. However, by that time, the Soviet Union had already crossed a new milestone. In November 1957, the first animal, the dog Laika, was sent into space. It took the United States more than a year to overcome this stage of the race. In December 1958, they managed to send a squirrel monkey named Gordo into space. The next achievement also belonged to the Soviet Union. On April 12, 1961, the first human flew into space, Yuri Gagarin. The Americans were only 3 weeks late. On May 5, 1961, the second person, astronaut Alan Shepard, went into space. Impressed by another loss in the space race, President John Kennedy decided to raise the stakes even higher. 20 days after Shepard's flight, he issued an open challenge to the USSR. In a speech at a joint session of both houses of Congress, Kennedy stated, "I believe that our country should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." The Soviet Union could not ignore the gauntlet thrown down before the eyes of the whole world, and intensified work on its own lunar program. It soon became clear that advantages in rocket engineering at this stage of the space race were no longer enough. Lunar flights required flawless work, but computing technology, automation, communication systems, and other systems were beyond what Soviet science of that time could handle. As a result, most of the unmanned spacecraft launches to the moon turned out to be unsuccessful. They either flew past the satellite or crashed onto its surface and broke apart. In total, from 1961 to 1970-21, missions were launched towards the moon, and only 3 of them were successful. They failed to create a heavy rocket needed to launch people to the moon. All the test models exploded at launch. Meanwhile, the Americans were working hard on their own program. They developed a new powerful rocket, Saturn V. The Apollo spacecraft was designed for 3 passengers, along with a landing module that was meant to deliver 2 astronauts to the moon. And finally, in July 1969, history was made. The historic Apollo 11 mission with astronauts Neil Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. On July 20, Armstrong and Aldrin, aboard the lunar module, landed on the moon and stepped onto the surface of the satellite. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," said Neil Armstrong as he was the first to descend the spacecraft's ladder. At the last moment, the Soviet Union made a desperate attempt to save face. 3 days before Apollo 11, it launched the unmanned Luna 15 station. Its mission was to land on the moon, collect soil samples, and return them to Earth. Luna reached the moon almost at the same time as Apollo and began its descent. On July 21, 1969, while the astronauts, having completed their mission, were on their way back, the Soviet station lost control, crashed onto the surface of the moon, and was destroyed. The moon race was over. The defeat of the Soviet Union was complete and final. After that, both lunar programs began to decline. The Soviet Union launched several lunar probes, after which it shut down the program. American astronauts made 5 more flights to the moon before NASA finally realized there was nothing left for them to do there. Despite the propaganda statements, the Apollo expeditions had virtually no scientific significance. Of the 12 people who visited the surface of the moon, only one was a scientist, geologist Harrison Schmitt, a member of the Apollo 17 crew. The main goal of the Apollo program was to demonstrate military capabilities, and once that was achieved, there was no more sense in continuing it. In 1972, the Americans shut down the program. In the more than half a century since the first flight to the moon, the situation has changed radically. Technology has made an impressive leap forward. The USA, China, the European Union, India, and private companies are now openly talking not only about flights to the moon, but also about creating permanent infrastructure there, extracting resources, and forming a new space economy, which in turn could bring significant profits. And while space used to be mainly a realm of symbolic rivalry, it is now gradually turning into a potential economic and strategic frontier of the 21st century. The reason for such interest is not just the desire to explore the moon. It's about specific resources and strategic advantages. In the polar craters of the moon, where the sun never reaches the bottom and the temperature never rises above -150 degrees, significant reserves of water ice have been discovered, which in the future can be used to extract drinking water, oxygen, and even rocket fuel. Lunar soil, or regolith, is suitable for building materials. The most promising areas are considered to be the craters near the moon's south pole. All current expedition projects are aimed specifically at these regions. In addition, regolith contains many metal oxides. Iron, aluminum, and silicon can be extracted from it. Iron and aluminum can be used for construction, and silicon for building solar panels. In the future, lunar settlements are expected to produce most of the materials they need on site. Next will come the turn of resources that can be exported from the moon and used on Earth. Due to limited transportation capabilities, the main requirement for such resources is that they must not weigh much, but must be very valuable. That's why the extraction of platinum group metals, platinum, rhodium, and iridium, is considered the most promising. In addition, the moon contains rare earth elements and helium-3, which is often called a potential fuel for future thermonuclear reactors, since it does not produce neutron radiation during nuclear fusion. So, a helium-3 reactor could be completely safe in terms of radiation. Today, the demand for this isotope is not very high, since thermonuclear reactors currently exist only in scientific laboratories. But when the first thermonuclear power plants appear, helium-3 will become a valuable energy resource. On Earth, it is practically non-existent, but on the moon, atomic nuclei are brought in by the solar wind. The extraction and delivery of helium-3 to Earth could become an extremely profitable business, and NASA today states that using the moon's resources is critically important for establishing a sustainable human presence in space. Although the actual development of lunar resources is still only in the planning stages, the question of who will get them and how to share the profits is already concerning governments and businesses now. But a legal gray area arises. Is it possible to not formally own a territory, but still effectively control its resources and infrastructure? The only legal act that can be considered the basis of space law is the Treaty on the Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. Better known as the Outer Space Treaty, developed in 1967 by the United Nations, it is an integral part of international law and defines the main principles of activities in space. Since it appeared during the height of the Cold War and the first space race, which had a clear military focus, the main goal of this treaty is to prevent the militarization of space and avert extraterrestrial conflicts. Therefore, its main provisions address the issues of weapons deployment and ownership. The treaty states that outer space, the moon, and other celestial bodies are to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. the testing and deployment of atomic and other weapons of mass destruction, as well as the establishment of military bases and the conduct of military maneuvers anywhere beyond Earth, are prohibited. It is also prohibited to establish national sovereignty over celestial bodies or their parts, as well as to claim national ownership of resources found there. The exploration and use of outer space must be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries. At the moment, 118 countries are parties to the treaty, including all those with their own space programs, and another 20 have signed it but have not ratified it. Later, when the first people landed on the moon, and the issue of using its resources stopped being purely theoretical, the United Nations tried to regulate them by proposing an agreement on the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies, or the Moon Agreement. According to it, the resources found on the moon are declared the common heritage of all mankind and cannot become the property of any state, company, or private individual. All of them must be fairly distributed among all the countries participating in the agreement. At the same time, special attention must be paid to the interests of developing countries. In other words, the United Nations proposed to treat the resources of the moon according to the principle of Sharikov. Take everything and divide it up. Such an openly communist approach was not liked even by those countries where communism was the state ideology. None of the countries with their own space programs signed the treaty. Today, only 17 countries are participants, and in fact, it does not affect international law. So, there is no comprehensive, universally recognized document regulating the use of the moon's resources, and the participants in the race are trying to fill this gap on their own. Preparing to return to the moon, the United States proposed that all interested parties sign the Artemis Accord, an international multilateral agreement from NASA that establishes principles and rules for the safe, peaceful, and responsible exploration of space, the moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies. It is positioned as the direct successor to the Apollo program, which is why it was named after Artemis, the twin sister of Apollo and the goddess of the hunt. In October 2020, it was signed by 8 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, and the United Arab Emirates. The agreement is open for signing, and as of today, 60 countries have joined it. Among them are almost all countries of the Americas and Europe, including Ukraine, as well as South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. The main goal of this agreement is to bring at least some clarity to the issue of ownership. After all, when establishing a settlement on the moon or developing a quarry, everyone wants to be sure that tomorrow another ship won't land in the same place and claim the plot and the resources available there. The United States of America interprets international law in such a way that resource extraction is allowed as long as the country does not claim sovereignty over the territory. This logic is also embedded in the Artemis Accord. However, critics believe that this could lead to the emergence of soft zones of control, where individual states or corporations would effectively gain a monopoly over strategic areas of the moon. To avoid such situations, the agreement provides for a certain form of staking claims to areas, while avoiding the very word ownership. Instead, it is proposed to use the term safety zone. When a certain country begins work on the moon, it declares the area where the work is being carried out as a safety zone and informs other countries and the Secretary General of the United Nations about it. The parties to the agreement agree to respect the boundaries of other countries as safety zones. The issue of minerals was also legally bypassed. Although the Outer Space Treaty prohibits appropriation of resources, the participants of the agreement agreed that mining on the moon is not considered appropriation. Therefore, they can establish mines and quarries there. Some countries have already incorporated this concept into their legislation. The first were the United States of America. In 2015, they allowed their companies to own, transport, and sell minerals extracted from the moon and other celestial bodies. According to the president of Planetary Resources, Chris Levitsky, this legal regime is similar to fishing in international waters. No one owns the sea, but the catch belongs to the fishermen. Later, similar laws were adopted by Luxembourg, the United Arab Emirates, and Japan. Already, 4 countries allow their residents to appropriate space resources. And, without a doubt, this list will expand in the near future. Relying on the Artemis Accords and national laws, a number of companies in the United States, Europe, Japan, and other countries are already developing projects for mining resources on the Moon and some asteroids. Although the Artemis Accords are a step forward toward creating space legislation, they have significant shortcomings. First of all, the agreement practically does not answer the question, what should be done if conflicts arise over the boundaries of safety zones and the rights to extract lunar resources? The only tool offered to a country that believes its rights have been violated is the possibility to request consultations with other members. Secondly, not all countries agree with the rules set out in the agreement. In particular, China and Russia have refused to sign it. Obviously, feeling that their own lunar exploration program is lagging behind the American one, the Chinese fear that upon arriving on the Moon, they will have to deal with already established American safety zones. Government media unanimously claim that the Artemis Accords revives Cold War customs and leads to conflicts in space. In contrast to the American approach, China, together with Russia, is promoting its own project, the International Lunar Research Station, effectively forming an alternative space bloc. On September 21, 2021, the parties signed a memorandum of cooperation on the creation of a lunar research station. Later, other countries joined the initiative. Currently, the program's partners include 13 countries, among them Pakistan, South Africa, Venezuela, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Serbia, and Egypt. The contents of the memorandums are not disclosed. Therefore, it is unknown what kind of relationships China plans to maintain with the other participants in lunar exploration. It is only clear that they differ from those proposed by the Artemis Accords. In fact, today, two space coalitions are being formed, each with its own vision of controlling lunar resources. And the lack of common rules only increases the risk of future conflicts. So far, the undisputed leader in the race to the Moon is the United States, which is successfully implementing the Artemis program. The program includes 5 missions, 2 of which have already been completed. The Artemis 1 mission took place in November and December of 2022. The Orion spacecraft, without a crew on board, reached the Moon, orbited it twice, and returned to Earth. The second mission lasted from April 1st to April 11th, 2026. It differed from the first one in that Orion orbited the Moon with 4 astronauts on board. The third mission will be dedicated to testing the modules that astronauts will use to land on the Moon. 2 such vehicles are being designed at once. Elon Musk's company SpaceX is building the Starship module, and Blue Origin, founded by Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, is building the Blue Moon module. During the Artemis 3 mission, which is scheduled to take place in mid-2022, the Orion spacecraft will rendezvous with both landing modules in Earth orbit. The astronauts will practice docking, transferring to the modules and back, and returning to Earth. Based on the results of the tests, the descent vehicle to be used in future missions will be selected. If the tests are successful, the Artemis 4 mission will launch in early 2028, during which humans will set foot on the surface of the Moon for the first time in 55 years. The Artemis program will conclude with the 5th mission, which is scheduled for the end of 2028. Astronauts will land on the Moon to begin construction of a permanent station there. After that, according to NASA's plan, expeditions to the Moon will become regular, and work on developing its resources will begin. China, the current rival of the United States, did not participate in the first lunar race. Therefore, its starting conditions were much weaker than those of the United States. It had neither experience in deep space flights, nor the technology capable of carrying out such missions, nor its own research of the lunar surface. China had to rapidly cover the entire path that the United States and the Soviet Union went through back in the 1960s and 1970s. Since the beginning of the 21st century, China has launched a program to explore the Moon using automatic Chang'e stations, named after the Chinese moon goddess. Moreover, unlike the Soviet lunar program, all the launches made by China were successful. The Chang'e 1 and Chang'e 2 spacecraft launched in 2007 and 2010, entered lunar orbit and created detailed maps of its surface. Chang'e 3 and Chang'e 4 in 2014 and 2018 landed on the Moon and conducted research on its surface and soil. Chang'e 5 and Chang'e 6 in 2020 and 2024 collected samples of lunar soil and delivered them to Earth. Now China has set its sights on the region that is currently the main target of the lunar race. In 2026, the launch of the Chang'e 7 spacecraft is planned, which is supposed to land near the Moon's south pole and conduct research there to look for water and other mineral resources. At the same time, China is also working on a program to send people to the Moon. As of today, it is planned to take place by 2030. In February 2026, there was a test of the new Chinese rocket Changzheng 10 and the spacecraft Mengzhou. Launching from the spaceport located on the Chinese island of Hainan, the rocket reached an altitude of 105 kilometers. There, Mengzhou was undocked and switched to autonomous flight mode. After that, the rocket and the spacecraft began to descend, and after a few minutes, landed in the sea. China is also working on the development of the landing module Lanyu, designed for 3 passengers. A working prototype has already been manufactured and is undergoing tests under terrestrial conditions. So China is moving in the same direction as the States, but is still lagging behind on the way to the Moon. The most powerful participant in the lunar race after the leaders is Europe. Although the EU does not currently have the capability to implement its own lunar exploration program, it is an active participant in the Artemis program. In particular, the European Space Agency has created a service module for the Orion spacecraft. It was developed with the participation of 13 European countries and assembled at the Airbus factory in Bremen. The module provides astronauts with air and drinking water, controls the temperature, and generates electricity using 4 solar panels. The module also includes 33 engines that propel Orion in deep space. Europe is a minority shareholder with full rights in the American project. This will allow them to prepare for their own missions and receive their share of the profits from activities on the Moon. Canada is also a partner in the Artemis project. It has been actively involved in the development of the Gateway space station, which was planned to be built in lunar orbit. And although in March 2026, NASA canceled this project and redirected funds to prepare for building a station on the surface of the Moon, Canada continues to be an active participant in the program. In particular, the crew of Artemis 2 included Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, and Japan joined the Artemis program in 2020. According to the agreement with NASA, it will create a lunar rover designed for driving on the Moon's surface. Engineers from Toyota are already working on this vehicle. The Japanese also plan to develop a lithium-ion battery that will provide energy for the future lunar station. As part of its cooperation with NASA, Australia has developed a laser communication system for the Artemis project, which allows data to be transmitted on the Moon, dozens of times faster than current radio wave systems. The country is also building a small autonomous rover for future lunar missions, which will carry out research tasks. India has its own lunar exploration program. In 2023, the Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft successfully landed on the surface of the satellite. This made India the 4th country to achieve a soft landing on the Moon, and the first to land its spacecraft near the South Pole. In 2028, the launch of the Chandrayaan-4 spacecraft is planned, which is expected to bring lunar soil samples back to Earth, and by 2040 to the Moon. In 2028, the launch is planned to bring lunar soil samples back to Earth. In 2028, the launch of the Chandrayaan-4 spacecraft is planned, which is supposed to deliver lunar soil samples to Earth. Of the countries that have joined the Chinese lunar program, Russia is the only one with experience in space flights. It inherited space technologies from the Soviet Union, which, by the way, were developed by Ukrainians. However, after the collapse of the USSR, Russia's space industry rapidly declined. If during the heyday of the Soviet space program in the early 1980s, there were up to 100 launches per year, then in 2025, Russia managed to conduct only 17. Most of them were carried out by Soyuz rockets, which were developed back in 1966 under the leadership of the Ukrainian Serhiy Korolyov. In 2023, Russia attempted to take part in the lunar race. An automatic station, Luna 25, was sent to the moon. However, due to an engine malfunction, the station lost control and crashed on the surface of the moon. The driving force behind the first lunar race was considerations of prestige. The participants competed for the title of the country with the most deadly weapons and the corresponding influence on global politics. There could only be one winner, and there was no point for other countries to join the race. This time, it's about dividing a big pie that almost everyone can get a slice of. Its size and the potential future gains fully justify the efforts being made today for the race. The return of humans to the moon. For example, the director of the Science and Technology Commission of the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, Bao Weiming, stated that by 2050, China expects to create an Earth-Moon economic zone with an annual turnover of $10 trillion. Of course, no one intends to miss out on the prospects of creating their own economic zones on the moon. All countries that have such an opportunity are now trying to be among the first to reach the moon, to stake their claim and secure areas for use. Judging by the available data, today the United States has the greatest chance of being the first to reach the moon. To ensure this success, the country is generously funding the Artemis program, with a total cost exceeding $102 billion. China is also rapidly increasing its spending on the lunar program, if less than $5 billion were spent on it. In 2016, then in 2024, it was nearly $20 billion. It's difficult to estimate the total cost of the program due to the non-public nature of China's state budget. According to the research firm Euroconsult, it significantly exceeds $100 billion. In addition, significant funds from the military budget may also be spent on it. Thanks to generous funding, China is quickly catching up with the U.S. The importance of winning the lunar race is also recognized in the corridors of power. The chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, Ted Cruz, spoke in favor of accelerating the Artemis program during special hearings on this issue. The senator said this is more than just research. The choices we make now will determine whether the United States remains a leader in space or gives way to an authoritarian regime. He was supported by NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, who believes that losing the lunar race could undermine America's position in the world. If one day we wake up and see that our competitors' astronauts have landed on the moon first, the blow to American exceptionalism will be so devastating that the shockwave will be felt around the world. So the U.S. is doing this, perhaps to be the first to get to the moon. However, even if America's leadership is maintained, the Chinese will soon appear there, and later representatives of other countries as well. And the question of how to delineate safety zones and how to share the resources found on the moon will still arise. And if the United States is seriously committed to a permanent human presence on the moon, we will have to figure out how to coordinate actions with the Chinese on safety and compatibility issues, whether we like it or not. People's lives will depend on this, believes Victoria Sampson, Chief Director for Space Security and Stability at the Secure World Foundation. Thus, not just scientific competition is beginning to form in space, but a new system of geopolitical rivalry. Against this backdrop, a global question arises. Can future resource extraction on the moon affect the Earth and its natural processes? After all, the moon's gravity creates tides and also helps stabilize the tilt of the Earth's axis, which directly affects the Earth's climate stability. But even large-scale resource extraction in the coming decades is unlikely to significantly change the moon's mass enough to disrupt the orbit or the Earth-Moon system. The mass of the moon is about 7.35 times 10 to the 22nd power kilograms. To have a real impact on orbital dynamics, it would be necessary to remove astronomical amounts of material. However, this does not mean that there are no risks. The main problem is not changing the moon's orbit, but creating new environmental threats in the space environment itself. NASA already acknowledges that lunar dust or regolith is extremely dangerous. Its microscopic particles have sharp, jagged edges, easily become electrified, stick to equipment, and can pose a threat to both technology and astronauts' health. Large-scale industrial mining could potentially raise huge clouds of dust, contaminate scientifically important areas, damage equipment, and create new forms of space debris. The polar craters of the Moon, which are of such great interest to countries, are especially vulnerable. These areas are both the most valuable from an economic point of view and the most important for science. In addition, astronomers are already warning that excessive commercialization of the Moon could harm its unique conditions for space research. For example, the far side of the Moon is considered an ideal place for radio astronomy because it is naturally shielded from Earth's radio noise. Intensive industrialization or construction of infrastructure in these areas could actually destroy unique opportunities for future scientific discoveries. The greatest risk, however, lies not even in environmental issues, but in geopolitics. Uneven distribution of resources can become especially dangerous. There are only a limited number of areas on the Moon with access to water ice, or the so-called peaks of eternal light. Whoever is the first to establish energy, transportation, and logistics infrastructure, there will gain a huge strategic advantage. And here we see more and more parallels with Earth's history. The struggle for oil, sea routes, colonies, rare Earth resources, or control over the Arctic. Some experts are already openly talking about the risk of a new lunar gold rush. Most likely, a future conflict in space will not look like a classic science fiction war. A much more realistic scenario is economic and technological dominance, control over energy hubs, transportation infrastructure, communication systems, fueling stations, and access to resources. In other words, space may repeat the same logic of geopolitics that humanity already observes on Earth, where infrastructure and resources have become instruments of global influence. That is why the key question for the future is no longer whether humanity will extract resources on the Moon. Most likely, this will happen sooner or later. The main question is whether humanity will be able to create a new space economy without bringing old earthly conflicts, resource wars, and struggles for dominance there. After all, history shows that technological progress by itself does not guarantee peace. And it's quite possible that the real test for civilization will begin not when humanity finally settles on the Moon, but when the question arises, who does it belong to? And what do you think? Will the Moon become a new battleground for resources and influence? Share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, on our channel The Price of the State, we've already released a series of videos about economic wars on Earth. We recommend watching them to better understand how conflicts over resources are already shaping global politics today. Friends, we have an ambitious goal to reach 200,000 subscribers on the channel by the end of 2026. You might have been watching us for a long time and not even realize that you haven't subscribed. Subscribe to our channel and tell your relatives and friends about it. Also, give us a like and leave a comment under this video. We thank all our donors, patrons, and sponsors on YouTube. Every hryvnia you donate brings Ukraine closer to economic prosperity and well-being. Because we are not just making videos, we are enlightening voters who will choose real reformers. Help us with this. The link to support the price of the state is in the description. This video was made possible thanks to
the support of Atlas Network. The opinions of the authors of the video do not necessarily reflect those of Atlas Network.